Welcome to the weekly podcast dedicated to amazing people with incredible journeys. But how did they get there? Who were the characters that impacted their stories? And how are they paying it forward now? Sit back and be inspired to go out and make a difference in the origin stories of the people you know, and even some that you don't. Welcome to the Prequel.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Prequel podcast. I am your host, Mike Azalina, and I am very excited to have you back here for the show that takes a look at the stories of others, so that in hopes we can impact your story and help you to continue to write your prequel in the way that you envision it to come true. Now, tonight I have a very special guest, Michele Capots, who is a transformational coach, and speaker and storyteller. So you know how much that means to me to have someone who's a storyteller on the show. And our conversation is really, really incredible, and actually one that I kind of needed going into tomorrow. I'm recording this, and you'll hear it in a few weeks, but I'm recording this the night before what would have been the last night of school, or what is the last night of school in the district that I had left. And I'm going to be pretty vulnerable here for a moment and tell you that I didn't expect to be so emotional over missing this day. I'm really having a hard time coming to grips with not being there with the staff, not being there with the students. I know it was a decision that I had to make for the betterment of my own health and the betterment of my family. But that doesn't make it any easier not to be there tomorrow. The last day of school, from the time I was a kid, was always a very exciting day. It was something that I looked forward to the night before, and something that, held this energy within me the day of. And you wake up a little bit brighter. You accomplished so much in 180 plus days as a kid, right? And then I got older and I never really left school. I was in school for 30 years as a student, and then as a teacher, and then as an administrator. And that feeling didn't change when I became an educator. I still woke up with that same energy that, there was accomplishment for 180 plus days with the kids that I got to spend every day with the colleagues that I had the opportunity to spend every day with. And to me, that was special. And when I got to experience it from the administrator perspective, the idea that a school ran somehow under my watch successfully gave it a little extra boost of energy. So I'm just having a really hard time emotionally knowing that I'm not going to be there tomorrow to experience that. And I think as time goes on and I continue to do the things that I'm doing, that maybe that'll wane and maybe I'll move past it. Maybe it never will. I don't know. And I'll never forget that feeling, though. I know I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to have a hard time getting out of bed. I know I'm going to be thinking about the students who will be excited to start their summer, but sad to say goodbye to their teachers. I know that I'm going to be thinking about the staff and their excitement, and that, energy of a summer come with a school year gone, but with such success and excitement. So to each and every one of you, I know you're probably hearing this way after the fact, but I appreciate all that you did this year. Your ability to enhance the stories of your students and make for an exciting 180 days, and then wrap it up with such joy and energy is really not comparable by any means. So I know, for me, this is a hard day. And this is the story that I'm telling tonight to get our episode off to a start, because I feel like Michele does a really nice job of sort of compounding how emotions can impact us. And there are things that I'm doing to kind of deal with this, and ways that I'm handling it. I wrote a little bit about it. I, sat in it for a little bit and just understood that it was something that I had to do. I looked internally at the decision and know that it's something that was necessary for me to continue to live a life, a healthy life, and, one that I was able to, continue to be proud of. So While I'm having a hard time, that doesn't mean that the hard time will continue forever. I'll be sad tomorrow, but hopefully on Friday I'll be feeling a little bit differently. But I appreciate listening to my rant here. Thanks for coming to my TED talk and dealing with my emotional behind here for the last 4 minutes. I feel like sometimes vulnerability is the best way to go, right? People when they can see you raw, they trust you. So I hope that that little raw look into my emotion and how I'm feeling tonight is a door open to, seeing the real Mike and not just the one who comes on here excited to host every week. So as excited as I am to talk to Michele, I am having a difficult time kind of settling into what tomorrow is and how I'm going to be missing out on that. But all of that being said, let's move into this conversation because it is an incredible one and I know you'll enjoy every moment of it. I'll be back afterward just to recap with some final thoughts. But until then, Michele Capots. All right, everybody, welcome into the Prequel studio. And I am so honored to be joined by transformational coach, speaker, and storyteller, which is like my favorite word in the world, Michele, joined by Michele Capots. Michele, thanks so much for joining the Prequel.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
I mean, I feel like we could have done a kickoff of the show just like listing all of the great things that you do, but I'm going to let you talk a little bit about what it is that you do right up front so that listeners have an idea of, where you're at in life right now and the things that you're doing to help and empower others. So I know, like I said, transformational coach, speaker, storyteller. Can you kind of summarize what you're doing right now to push other people and help them in their lives, in their own prequels?
Okay, good. Yes. So, yes, as you said, I'm a transformational coach and speaker and storyteller with a focus on mental wellness and resilience. That's a big focus of mine. And with my clients, I like to work with people, and I'll tell you how it relates to me later, but I like to work with people who feel stuck right now, whether that's in their comfort zone or reaching their next level or just wanting to show up in a more meaningful way in the world. A lot of my clients tend to be in that space, whether they're just feeling stuck is what I found with a lot of them. And I help them achieve their goals with an approach that really works from the inside and then going on the outside. So it's looking within in order to look out. And a lot of that, you talk about the stories, a lot of that goes into having the courage and the willingness to look at your own story and what you can learn from it and grow from it. And I do that. So that's with my clients in my coaching. And then the storyteller part, I'm also a writer. So I tell stories because I'm also a writer, and that's where the storyteller comes in.
I mean, Michele, we are walking like a path right alongside of each other. I love to write and I do love to inspire others and to help them find comfort and passion in their world. So I'm glad we're having this conversation because I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from you tonight as we dig in. And I want to start sort of with something that you said, and I think as people listen and they hear about who you are, do you work with people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all employment areas? Are you kind of like focused in one area? Talk to me a little bit about that and what you find your clients to be.
So my focus is mental wellness and resilience, but I'm not a mental health coach. Mental wellness has a much more, let me back up. So for me, mental health was the diagnosis. It's the medication, it's the therapy, it's the doctors. That's where I see mental health. And mental wellness to me is the process itself. It's the steps you take to get there. So maybe it's meditation, eating well, getting enough sleep, But it even goes deeper than that. It's really the mind body connection. It's the combination and the connection of the mind and body. And that involves everyone. Everyone can strive for mental wellness. So it's not mental health that I look at. And because of that, I do work with a wide variety of people. I work with people who have struggled with mental health and gotten to a certain point and want to go further. I work with people who are having difficulties in their job or their relationship. I really end up working with people who just know that something isn't working and they want to learn how they can reach the next level, whatever that might be for people. And that brings me to a lot of different people. I wouldn't say that I have a niche, like I work with moms or I work with coaches. My focus is mental wellness and resilience, but that really encompasses where I come from. That encompasses everything of a person, the whole person, and how it impacts both your mind and body.
I love that so much. So I come from the education field. I was a teacher for 8 years and a school administrator for 8 years, and I know that I hit my crossing this year. I had some mental wellness things happen that then turned into some physical wellness things, and I think, you know, and this is, I'm going to pose this more as a statement, but if you can speak off of it, that would be great. I feel like I let it get too far and it started to affect me physically. Is that something that you feel possible that you see happen to people where they let it get too far and then it affects them in a physical way?
I think that what I have seen and what I have found in my own experience as well is it's very easy for something to happen. Say you have a little bit of a backache and you push it off and, oh, it's bothering me, and you push it aside and you push it off and you push it off, and maybe it gets a little worse. It starts being like, no, you're not paying attention, and it gets a little worse, and you still push it off and no, it's no big deal. I can keep going. I can go for a run today.
This sounds a lot like me, Michelle. You sound like you're basically talking about my life.
All right. And then in one final push, something happens. And maybe it's your mental health. Maybe it's an injury or an illness or something happens that makes you pay attention. And a lot of times that can be like something that we've pushed aside for too long and everything kind of comes crumbling down all at once. And I have found that in my own experience. Okay. In my own experience, I can tell you about this later, but when I went through a depression, something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, but I kept going and going and going until it got to the point that I had to pay attention. I had to do something about it.
Yeah. And for me, that was having to leave my role as a principal. That's when I had to step away. I had all these things screaming at me, but I ignored them for too long. It's exactly what you said. But I'm also guilty of doing that in the physical aspect. So you were really walking that line with me. I appreciate that. But I do want to ask you, now that we have a clear vision on what you do, and I think it's so important, your job that you are carrying out into the world right now is so vital. Like I said, I worked in education. I saw teachers sort of falling down that rabbit hole, that struggle, that trying to find themselves. And I think it's so important. But now I want to know the story that got you here. So I want to start with this because you are a storyteller. And I have to ask the question, did you have somebody in your life who was like that storyteller that made you grasp on to stories? Or was it just something that happened by happenstance, like just kind of occurred for you?
So I have wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. And before I got serious into coaching, I was a writer in a past life, and now I'm bringing it back a little bit. I'm writing more. But I am the person that in class, well, your students, in class when you're not paying attention and you doodle and you're making little drawings and you're doodling everywhere. I wouldn't do that. I would make up stories. I would write stories about my teacher. I would write stories about other students in the class. I would just spend my time in class making up stories. So I was the storyteller. I'm really the one that always would sit down, and I've been drawn to stories. I've always been drawn to stories. And then I used to be a reporter. So as a living, it was my job to tell other people's stories. And I love doing that too.
That's incredible. So mine was my grandfather, and I've talked about him on the show before. He was like this amazing oral storyteller. But before he passed away, I asked him to write down all of his stories.
Oh, nice.
And he did. He wrote them in a journal. For my cousin has the journal, so that way it's safe. She's the most responsible of us all. But I didn't remember as a child, like you were saying, ever really clinging to writing. But my uncle this past Memorial Day brought a little booklet that I wrote when I was in first grade, and it was like a story about a pet bunny that I had. And my mom said, like, you loved to write as a kid. I just don't recall loving writing, but I do now. So I can relate to that. But I think I was drawn to storytelling and writing because of the stories that my grandfather had told me. It's interesting how stories and how we perceive them or take them in do help to write our frame of our lives, right? Like all of our stories intertwine with one another's, and become a part of the choices that we make or the paths that we take to advance ourselves. And I'm really interested to get to know more about your story, and I know our listeners are too. So I want to kind of dive into that and get the feel for what brought you to become this transformational coach and speaker that specializes in mental wellness and resilience. So if you could just kind of do what you do and tell us that story about the experience that brought you here. What was the prequel that brought you to this point?
So everything really started for me when I went through a depression that changed everything. And at the time, I was in my late 20s. I was a newspaper reporter, like I said. I was living in this amazing apartment. It was above an architect studio, and it had high ceilings and tons of light. My roommate had painted a huge sunflower on the living room wall. And my favorite thing was my purple front door. I had a purple front
Oh,
door.
wow.
I thought that was the coolest. I really liked my
Yeah.
purple front door. But one summer I lost interest in everything. I couldn't, it was like I said, I was going and I was trying to pretend everything was okay when nothing felt okay anymore. I lost interest in that apartment. I lost interest in being around my friends. I didn't eat. I struggled with sleeping. And at work, I started to lose my concentration, my focus. I would be on an interview and I would completely zone out. The person would say something, and I'd start thinking, I'm a failure. I'll never have, like, I just would reiterate in my head. And eventually it got to be too much. I had to take I had to take a leave of absence from work. And my family worried about me living on my own. So I had to move out of that amazing apartment with the purple door and move into my old bedroom in the home I grew up in. And then I really felt like a failure. My friends were buying houses and getting promotions and getting married, and I could barely drag myself out of bed. And 2 months passed. I was off work for 2 months, and slowly, with therapy and medication and exercise, that was a big component, I started to get better. But on the day that it was time to return to work, I didn't want to go. People knew what had happened. They knew where I was, and I was embarrassed, even a little ashamed. And I worked in a strip mall, and I remember pulling into the parking lot that day and just trying to get the courage to walk inside. When I reached for the door, it felt like a ton of bricks. And unfortunately for me, it had one of those, the bells that ding every time you walk in the door.
Yes.
So the bell dinged and everybody looked up and I froze. But Marcy, who was the administrative assistant, ran over and gave me a hug. And when she did, I felt my body start to soften and it relaxed a little bit. And then she whispered something in my ear that told me everything was going to be okay. And all she said was, I take Prozac too. And in that moment, letting me know that I wasn't alone gave me the strength I needed to step inside. It was powerful, and the story should have ended there, but it didn't. Several years later, there'd be another depression, this time followed by mania, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I had several outlandish manic episodes, and I started to feel like, what's that game where you pop up and you hit it down?
Whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole. I feel like that game. Every
Yeah.
time I got well, I got knocked down again. But what had happened, and that I didn't realize, is that feeling that day when I walked into the office and that bell dinged, that one moment of utter insecurity and fear and feeling less than, it became a regular, everyday experience. Without even realizing it, I let self-stigma and not feeling good enough, low self-worth, creep into every area of my life. At this point, I wasn't writing anymore. I was finding myself in a series of unfulfilling jobs and toxic relationships, and I was completely disconnected from my authentic self. And I saw people around me who had the things I wanted, and I would tell myself, it's easy for them, or it'll work for them, and it'll never work for me. I'll never find the job I love. I'll never have the healthy relationship. I won't be that person that I want to be. And I believed those stories that I told myself. And I started to feel like I was broken. And it became comfortable. It became a comfortable place to be, and I stayed there. I stayed stuck. And then about a year later, I met a woman who became my mentor. And she taught me the power of an old war saying, run toward the sound of the cannon, which basically means run towards your fears and the things that are holding you back instead of away from them. And I never realized how powerful those words would be, and it's something I still practice today. At this point, my comfort zone had become uncomfortable. I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. But the only way to do what she suggested was to look within. So I learned how to question my thoughts and the feelings that created them. I had the willingness to look deep into where these beliefs began. And when I did, I could see that I was never broken. It was a misperception. It was only my perception that was broken, not me, but my perception. And when I realized this, that is when things in my life started to change for me.
Wow. First of all, I want to say thank you for your vulnerability in sharing that story. I appreciate your willingness to do so. Secondly, as you were wrapping up there, I was reminded of a speaker that I heard this past summer, and he was talking similarly about the soundtracks in our own heads, right? The soundtracks that we play are the most powerful and loudest soundtracks of any that we listen to, because our voice is there's the voice we hear the most. And if we can't be kind to ourselves, then that starts to play over and over again and becomes the soundtrack of our lives. And it sounds like for anyone, that when you fall into that trap, when you fall into that, it does become the safe zone almost, right? Unless you can look internally, like you said, and start to interrupt and become the impediment to those thoughts, then you tend to stay there and see, like you said, that, well, that person's over there, I'll never be able to do this. Unless you can be the impediment, that comparison gap's just going to grow and grow and grow, right?
Absolutely. And the dangerous part is when you have that inner dialogue and it's negative all the time, and you're telling yourself those negative stories. And in my case, I believed them. I started to believe them, and it prevented me from doing the things I wanted. It prevented me from going after my goals or my dreams because I told myself it won't work. Self stigma and the beliefs I had about myself, and it's really my mental illness that was the trigger for everything for me. Like that was the catalyst that got me started, but not feeling good enough or not feeling smart enough, or it happens for a lot of different reasons. People feel stuck or unable to move forward for a lot of different reasons. For me, it was my mental health, but it can happen for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Right. And would you suggest then, you mentioned this before, to take a pause and look internally to see what it is that's roadblocking? Or are you saying that it might not be an internal thing in some cases? It could be something else that you're perceiving from the outside?
No, I think that a lot of times it all goes back to patterns that we've developed and habits that we've developed over time. And they can become second nature. A lot of times we don't even realize that we're doing it. And our thoughts have a lot to do with that. Our thoughts have a lot to do with that as well. The thoughts that we tell ourselves. So questioning those thoughts, is it true? Can I know for 100% certainty that this is true? And that's one of the things that I love working with people on, is getting them to question the beliefs that they have.
Right.
And then also for me, where some of it comes in as well is the way our bodies respond to those thoughts. So we respond to those thoughts internally, whether through tension or a contraction in our body. And this is so interesting. Neuroscientists have found that it takes 90 seconds for a sensation, a feeling to pass through the body. Anything longer than 90 seconds shows we're looped in the story. We're reinforcing it. We're the ones doing it. It only takes 90 seconds to travel, but we're the ones that reinforce that story over and over again.
Wow. I'm having like one of those mind-blowing moments that I'm going to have to like process that for when I end the show. I'm like, that's going to be a processing moment for me. You talked in your story about people that, stepped to you when you needed them, like Marcy, the administrative assistant at your place of employment. And then you talked about the doctor who also had a very, or was she a doctor or was she just
My
a woman?
mentor.
Your mentor, I'm sorry.
My
Okay.
mentor.
So your mentor, who had a great impact on you. Were there other people or specific moments, experiences that you would say played a key in turning you toward what you're doing now?
So I've been lucky. I am a coach, but I've always had a coach. So I'm a coach who has a coach. And I've had some amazing teachers. I've been very blessed with some amazing teachers in my life, both coaching, writing, speaking. I've been blessed with a lot of different teachers. But one particular coach that sticks out really changed the game for me. And it was the one that made me realize that I was working with my very first coach. I'll back up for a second. My very first coach that I worked with called me resilient. Nobody had ever called me that. And I don't even know that I had a full understanding of what resilience meant. But she called me resilient. And I took that and I really took that in and thought about it and then owned that part of my story. You know what? I am resilient. I am resilient. I absolutely am resilient. And you're not born. Although I've had, as I mentioned, teachers, and you mentioned your grandfather, I should mention my mother. My mother is my hero, the strongest woman that I know. She has dementia now, but she's the strongest woman I know. She lost 2 husbands in her lifetime and never faltered, never lost her faith, she never let it pummel her. And she taught me that. And she taught me resilience, although at the time I didn't know it was resilience. So there was my first coach that opened my eyes up to that. And then my most recent one that really pushed me because everything I have gone through, everything, I have used all of the tools and the techniques that I use with others on myself. So I'm not asking someone to do anything that I haven't gone through myself, that I haven't done myself. And my most recent coach really pushed my edges and caused me to really grow as a person. And I'm grateful for that.
That's great. I love how, like I said before, people kind of weave in and out of our lives and they fall in at like times that just feel like they're supposed to be there at those moments. And I love hearing about other people's experiences with that and hearing about your coaches and how they've impacted you and your mother. Yes, my mother is like my hero. So I totally get it. She's an angel for having, raised my brother and I and done it with such grace. So,
Grace
um,
is a good word. Grace is
it's,
a good word to describe mothers. Absolutely.
yeah, I feel like she's the definition at this point in my life. I really do. So, clearly you're taking all of this that, people have done for you and that your experiences have taught you and you're paying it forward in your coaching, but you're also speaking too. Can you just give us a glimpse of, how you're paying it forward in that way and what that looks like? And if there's any other ways that you're kind of paying it forward to to society, you can certainly fill us in on that as well.
So in speaking, I've talked to a variety of different people. I've talked at high schools and colleges before and shared my story a little bit there. Um, I'm a member of a really neat organization called the Global Mental Health Peer Network.
Okay.
And it's an organization of 36 countries that are all advocates, do mental health advocacy, all peers doing mental health advocacy, some on policy sides, some on all different sides. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to speak at a lot of different events and presentations through that organization in sharing my story there. So that has been really, really powerful too. And it's been amazing to hear other people from different countries and their experience with mental illness and their own challenges. It's been really neat to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you learn and take home so many different ideas and pieces of advice and experiences that others have had, and connections that you can lean back on. And I value those opportunities that you're speaking of, those opportunities where you can learn from someone else and put that into my own life, and try and better myself through, the experience of others and their connectedness. So I have one final question for you, and it might be something that you've heard from one of these people, that you've heard speak. It may be something that, you try and pass along to clients or to audiences as you speak to them. But, if you could give advice to those who are, building their prequel right now, just maybe a young teacher coming out of college or a writer who's, trying to push into the game or someone who's struggling in that world of mental health. Any advice that you feel like would be valuable to someone working through their prequel so that they can continue writing their story and help others write theirs as well?
I think that the first thing that came to mind when you said that is keep going, is to keep going. A lot of times, and that goes back to what we were talking about with the self-talk and the inner dialogue. A lot of times it can be difficult not to talk ourselves out of things, because we don't think we're ready or we have the experience, or in my case, we're not good enough in order to do it. And I think my biggest piece of advice would be keep going. Just keep going. Because if I would have let any one of those experiences stop me, I wouldn't be here now. And there were many times that I wanted to stop. And there's been times in starting my business that I've wanted to stop. I haven't getting it off the ground and starting my business, and it's not easy. And you want to stop. There's many times that you just want to stop. And my biggest piece of advice is to keep going. And actually, three pieces of advice.
No, it's great.
The first one is to keep going. The other one is to find those teachers, whether it's your mother, whether it's a coach or a mentor or your principal or whoever it might be. Find those teachers because they can make a huge impact on your life and help you. They help me realize things that I didn't even know. And the third thing is that you're never alone. Marcy reaching out that day, and even when you think that you are alone and that no one understands, or that no one understands that you're alone, that you are absolutely never ever alone. There is always someone to talk to. There is always someone to call. And the simple fact of sharing your story with someone else, as soon as you share that story, you're lighter. It lessens whatever it is you're holding on to as soon as you share it with somebody else. So I guess it's to keep going, find your teachers, and know you're never alone. Share your story.
Love that. I love that. And as someone who's really passionate about stories, it's the thing that I lean on the most. And when I speak to teachers and administrators, that's always my message. You know, you have a story. Every student has a story. And some parts of their story you may not know. And some parts they don't know how to tell you yet. So help them tell you. You know, be that person that they can lean on. Be that person that they can come to. Create that relationship so that they can't wait to tell you their story. And that they feel like they have to, because that's the connection they feel. So I value that, sharing your story, because I think, you know, as adults, we struggle with that vulnerability at times, right? And part of my goal and job when I was in the classroom or in the school was I want to create a place where kids feel like their story can be told and that their story has a value and it matters. And if we can start that at a young age, then, you know, maybe that's the first step. And giving them that connectedness and belonging to know that their story matters. So I appreciate you saying that. Really do. Thank you. So I am going to give you the floor here to tell us where we can find you, because I feel like a lot of people are going to want to look for you after they hear you talking, Michele. So are there places where we can find you? And as you're saying it, I'll have it run across the screen so that, you know, people can check it out and write it down and do what they need to do to search you up.
So my website, which is michelecapots.com, and Michele is 1L. I'm a little, people always do two. I'm a 1L Michele. And then also michelecapots.com spelled out, .com spelled out on Instagram as well.
Okay, got it. We'll make sure that we have those on there for you so that people can find you and follow you and reach out if they need you. And I would encourage everybody to do so, that if you're finding yourself in a place where you could just use a little bit of coaching to get unstuck, this is the person. So find her and use her. So Michele, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the prequel. I really enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully you and I can stay in touch and continue working together to bring some awareness to all of the things that you're doing.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. I really hope that I continue to have this feeling after an interview that I just had a conversation with someone who's out there doing amazing things. Every time I stop talking to one of these people, I just feel so empowered to go and bring that voice out to more people. And I feel fortunate enough to have these conversations and to learn from people like Michele. And tonight I learned a lot, and I hope that you did as well. And a couple of things that I want to highlight here before I sign off for the evening is sort of going back to what I said before the interview with Michelle at the beginning of the conversation, where I'm struggling right now. And that's to question my thoughts, because the thoughts I was having before was, wow, I have failed these kids and the staff, that I'm not there for the full year. And that was starting to fade. But then as the last day approached, I started to have that feeling again. And so for me now, it's about questioning those thoughts. Is that true? Did I fail them? Because when I think about it in the grand scheme, I don't feel like I did. I feel like my legacy is still there. I feel like I impacted people during my time in a very positive way. And I don't say that as a pat on the back, but I say that as a self-realization that I did everything I could while I was there, and I only left for the sake of my health and for my family. So I feel like that her advice in making sure that you question those thoughts when they start to enter your head is very powerful. Because before I recorded this, that's what I did. I sat in it for a while and I started questioning these thoughts that I was having the night before the last day of school. And this is where I landed, that's just not true. It's not factual, that I did not fail them. That's not what happened. I loved what she talked about, the old war cry of run toward the sound of the cannon, run toward your fears and tackle them. Whatever your fears are, run toward it. Don't run away from them. The more we run away, the more we believe that they're real. And the more that we run away from the sound of the cannon, from the fears, the more that we start to believe that story, the narrative that we paint in our heads. We talked about the soundtracks that, go off in our brains, and how that voice can really prevent you, because it's the most powerful voice in your world. It's the one that you hear the most. It's the one that you believe, because it's the one that's loudest. So if we're running away from that voice telling us, no, 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 it's just going to get louder. It's going to continue to shout through those eardrums. It's going to vibrate pretty loudly. And I think the more that we can walk toward it, the more scared the fear becomes, if that makes sense. It sounds cool when I say it, but the more we walk toward it, the less we fear it. So continue to walk toward the sound of that, and don't let your own voice be the impediment to what you want to do towards your greatest goals. I think about my own journey and having to leave something that I loved, well, turning that into a positive and writing a book. That was a fear I always had. I love putting things on paper, but I didn't think anybody would want to read it. And here I am, months away from my first book coming out. So don't ever let anybody tell you you can't. And I think back to my interview with Jamie Beebe, when she had her ex-boyfriend tell her that she'd never create or design a bikini or sell a bikini. And now here she is selling thousands and thousands. So, for me, as I sit here and think about Michelle and the connection between Jamie's story, Michelle's story, and probably every story of every person who listens to this, the voices in our heads can really detract us, or the voices from other people start to narrate the voice in our heads for us. Don't let that happen to you. Let your story be your story. And then one last thing that I want to touch on is her final advice, which was to keep going, to find the people who can teach you, and know that you're never alone. Always share your story. The more you share it, the lighter you become. Keep going. I'm just gonna leave it at that, because I think all of keep going encompasses that. You can keep going by finding your people. You can keep going by knowing that you're never alone, and you can keep going by sharing the story that makes you who you are. Right? Don't keep your story hidden. Be vulnerable, be raw. I did that at the beginning of the episode, and there was a purpose in that, because I knew it would come full circle at the end of this. Don't ever stop. Yeah, I'm sad about today, but it's not going to keep me here. Sorry, tomorrow. But it's not going to keep me here, right? I'm going to keep moving forward, because that's what's best for me. That's what's best for people to hear my story and to learn from it. So always keep going. And I take that from Michelle. It feels like every time I talk to someone new, I take a new lesson from them. And that's exactly why this podcast matters so much to me. And I hope that it's doing for you what it does for me, which is to continue to build my own story through the story of others. Michelle and I stayed on for a while after and talked a little bit about my own experiences with mental wellness and mental health, and my family's experiences with that. And, her kindness and generosity in that conversation and willingness to take some extra time and talk to me meant a lot. And now our prequels are interwoven, and I'll always have Michelle's input and her lessons to lean on. So I hope you do as well. Now, before I sign off, please remember where you can follow me, www.mikeazzolina.com. I'm really struggling with the blogs. I promise I'll get out there. I've just been super busy with the book. So I'm going to keep trying to get stuff out there to y'all on there, and then on Twitter at Mike Azzolina. On Facebook, you can find me, Mike Azzolina. Instagram at AzzolinaM. And on TikTok at Mike Azzolina 5. So please make sure you're following and all of those places for more conversations, more inspiration, more motivation, and just more knowing that your story matters. Please remember that you are loved and that you matter in every room that you walk into. Your story, keep writing it. Write it every day. Write it with vigor. And while you're at it, help someone else write theirs in a positive way too. I cannot wait to talk to you next time. Much love to each and every one of you. Go be great.